I never thought owning my dream home would turn into a neighborhood war, but here I am, sitting in my living room at 3 a.m., watching security footage for the 100th time, wondering how a simple driveway dispute escalated into the most satisfying revenge story of my life. Let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months ago, I closed on a beautiful craftsman-style house in Maplewood Heights, one of those older neighborhoods where the trees are massive, the lots are generous, and everyone knows everyone, or so I thought. The house had everything I'd dreamed of: original hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, and most importantly, a wide driveway that could fit 3 cars comfortably. That driveway would become the center of a battle I never saw coming. The first week was perfect. My neighbors, the Johnsons on the left, brought over homemade cookies. The elderly Mr. Patterson across the street waved every morning. Even the young couple 2 doors down stopped by to introduce themselves. Everything felt like a Norman Rockwell painting. Then I met Victoria Ashford. Victoria lived in the corner house, a massive colonial that clearly cost 3 times what mine did. She drove a pristine white BMW X7, the kind that screams, "I need to speak to your manager," before she even opens her mouth. Our first encounter should have been my warning sign. I was unloading groceries when she pulled up beside my driveway, rolled down her window, and without even a hello said, "You're the new owner? Good. The previous owner let me use part of his driveway when I had guests. I'm having a dinner party Friday. I'll need you to keep your car on the street that evening." I stood there, bags in hand, completely stunned. Not, "Nice to meet you," not, "Would you mind," just a flat-out demand. I managed a polite smile and said, "I'm sorry, but I'll need my driveway. Maybe your guests could park on the street?" Her expression could have frozen lava. "Excuse me? Do you know how much my guests' cars cost? I can't have them parking on the street like common vehicles." The previous owner understood neighborhood courtesy. "Well, I'm not the previous owner," I replied, my smile fading. "And it's my property." She stared at me for a long moment, her jaw tight, then rolled up her window and drove off without another word. I should have known then that this wasn't over. Victoria Ashford wasn't the type of woman who accepted no gracefully. Friday evening came, and I made sure both my cars were parked in my driveway, my daily driver and my late father's restored 1967 Mustang that I'd inherited. That Mustang meant everything to me. It was the car Dad and I had spent 5 years restoring together before he passed. Every weekend we'd be in that garage, him teaching me about engines, carburetors, and patience. When he died, that car became my most precious possession. I kept it under a custom cover, only driving it on special occasions. Around 7 p.m. I heard car doors slamming. I glanced out my window and saw Victoria's dinner party, at least 8 luxury vehicles crowding the street in front of her house. And there she was, standing on her porch, arms crossed, staring directly at my driveway with a look that could shatter glass. I went back to my dinner thinking that was the end of it. I was so wrong. The next morning I had an early meeting. I walked out my front door at 6:30 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to start my Saturday, when I stopped dead in my tracks. There, blocking my entire driveway at a perfect horizontal angle, was Victoria's pristine white BMW X7. Not partially blocking, completely blocking. Both my cars were trapped. The BMW sat there like a middle finger made of German engineering. My first instinct was to knock on her door. I walked over, rang the doorbell 3 times, knocked, even called out. Nothing. Either she wasn't home, or she was pretending not to be. I checked my watch. My meeting was in 40 minutes across town. Panic started setting in. I called her number, which Mr. Patterson had given me for neighborhood emergencies. Straight to voicemail. That's when I noticed the note under her windshield wiper. My hands were shaking as I pulled it out, written in perfect cursive on expensive stationery. "Perhaps now you'll understand the importance of neighborhood cooperation. Your driveway will be available when you learn proper etiquette. V.A." I read it 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each word. She hadn't accidentally blocked me. This was intentional. This was calculated. This was punishment for not obeying her demands. I stood there in my driveway looking at that note, and something inside me snapped. Not into anger, into cold, calculated determination. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First, the non-emergency police line. The officer was sympathetic, but explained that since it was private property dispute and her car was technically on the street's edge, I'd need to go through civil channels. He suggested I call a tow company. That's when the idea hit me. The idea that would change everything. You see, 3 months earlier, I'd made a business investment that seemed random at the time. My cousin Marco ran a towing and impound company, and he'd been looking for a silent partner to expand. I'd invested $5,000 and technically owned 40% of Metro Towing and Recovery. I hadn't thought much about it since signing the papers. It was just a business investment. But standing there looking at Victoria's BMW, I realized I didn't just have access to a tow truck. I had access to an impound lot. My impound lot. I called Marco. Hey cousin, remember that investment I made? I need to understand something about how impound lots work. 20 minutes later, I had all the information I needed, and a plan that was beautifully, perfectly legal. I stood there looking at that BMW, Victoria's smug note in my hand, and smiled for the first time that morning. She'd blocked my driveway. She'd left that note. She'd made this personal. Now, I was about to teach her the most expensive lesson in neighborhood etiquette she'd ever receive. The game was on, and Victoria Ashford had no idea what she'd just started. I called Marco back. I need a favor, a legal favor, but one that's going to feel very, very satisfying. Marco chuckled on the other end. I know that tone. What did someone do to you? I explained the situation, the blocked driveway, the note, Victoria's entitled attitude. Marco listened quietly, then said, Hold on. Let me conference in Rita. Rita was their company's legal consultant, a sharp-as-nails former district attorney who'd moved into private practice. If anyone could tell me the exact boundaries of what I could legally do, it was her. 5 minutes later, I was on a three-way call getting the best news I'd heard all day. Here's the situation, Rita explained in her precise courtroom voice. If a vehicle is blocking your driveway on your private property, you have the right to have it towed. However, if it's on the public street but blocking your access, it gets trickier. But based on what you're describing, the car is positioned perpendicular across your driveway entrance. That's blocking access to private property. You're well within your rights. And since I'm part owner of the impound lot, I asked, barely containing my excitement. The vehicle goes to your company's lot like any other towed vehicle. She'll be charged standard impound fees, storage fees, and she'll need to show proof of ownership and pay all fees before release. Completely standard procedure, nothing personal about it, just business. The smile on my face could have lit up the whole neighborhood. How soon can you get a truck here? Give me 20 minutes, Marco said. And Tyler, I'm bringing the truck with the lift. This is going to be so clean, she won't have a single scratch to complain about. 5 minutes later, I was on a three-way call getting the best news I'd heard all day. Here's the situation, Rita explained in her precise courtroom voice. If a vehicle is blocking your driveway on your private property, you have the right to have it towed. However, if it's on the public street but blocking your access, it gets trickier. But based on what you're describing, the car is positioned perpendicular across your driveway entrance. That's blocking access to private property. You're well within your rights. And since I'm part owner of the impound lot, I asked, barely containing my excitement. The vehicle goes to your company's lot like any other towed vehicle. She'll be charged standard impound fees, storage fees, and she'll need to show proof of ownership and pay all fees before release. Completely standard procedure. Nothing personal about it, just business. The smile on my face could have lit up the whole neighborhood. How soon can you get a truck here? Give me 20 minutes, Marco said. And Tyler? I'm bringing the truck with the lift. This is going to be so clean she won't have a single scratch to complain about. I went back inside and did something I'd been meaning to do since moving in. I checked my security camera footage. I had cameras covering my driveway and front yard, installed by the previous owner. I'd barely looked at them, but now I pulled up last night's footage. There, at 11:47 p.m., clear as day, was Victoria's BMW pulling up and deliberately positioning itself across my driveway. The timestamp would prove this wasn't an accident. She'd blocked me intentionally, late at night, ensuring I'd discover it in the morning when I had places to be. I downloaded the footage to 3 separate locations. Evidence. Marco arrived exactly 23 minutes later in a flatbed tow truck, professional as always. He stepped out wearing his company uniform, clipboard in hand. All right, cousin, let's do this by the book. I need you to sign the authorization form requesting the tow due to blocked access to your private property. I signed with a flourish. Marco walked around the BMW taking photos from every angle with a timestamp camera, standard procedure to document the vehicle's condition before towing. Then he attached the wheel lift with the precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. The BMW rose smoothly into the air, and within minutes, it was secured on the flatbed. That's when I saw the curtain move in Victoria's front window. She was home. She'd been home the entire time. I couldn't see her face, but I could imagine the expression when she saw her $8,000 BMW being lifted onto a tow truck. Marco saw me looking and grinned. "Want to leave a note?" I thought about it. The petty part of me wanted to leave something sarcastic, but Rita's advice echoed in my head. Keep everything professional, documentation only. Instead, I took out my phone and texted Victoria's number. "Your vehicle was towed from my property due to blocked driveway access. You can retrieve it from Metro Towing and Recovery at 4750 Industrial Parkway. Bring proof of ownership and payment for fees. Tyler, professional, courteous, perfectly legal." Marco drove away with the BMW, and I finally got into my car, now that my driveway was accessible, and headed to my meeting. I was an hour late, but I'd never felt more energized. All through the meeting, my phone stayed silent. No angry texts, no calls, nothing. The silence was somehow more satisfying than any angry confrontation would have been. When I got home around 2 p.m., that silence ended. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Hello? Where's my car?" Victoria's voice could have shattered my phone's speaker. "What have you done? That is a $9,000 vehicle. If there's a single scratch..." "Your vehicle was towed because it was blocking my driveway," I said calmly. "I sent you the address of the impound lot. You'll need to..." "I know what I need to do. I've already called them. Do you know what they're trying to charge me? $450 in fees. This is extortion. This is illegal. I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. "The fees are standard and posted publicly," I interrupted. "Towing fee, impound fee, and storage is calculated by the hour. It's all regulated by the city. I'd recommend picking it up soon. The storage fees do add up." There was a long pause. Then, in a voice dripping with venom, "You'll regret this. I know people, important people. This neighborhood won't tolerate someone like you." She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, and realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. I wasn't angry. I was calm. Because for the first time since meeting Victoria Ashford, I wasn't reacting to her games. I was controlling the board. An hour later, Mr. Patterson knocked on my door. The elderly man looked concerned. "Tyler, I heard what happened. Victoria's been calling everyone in the neighborhood saying you had her car stolen, that you're trying to shake her down for money. I wanted to hear your side." I invited him in, made coffee, and showed him everything. The security footage of her blocking my driveway at midnight, her note, the text I'd sent her, the completely legal towing authorization. His expression changed from concern to barely suppressed amusement. "That woman," he said, shaking his head, "has been terrorizing this neighborhood for 8 years. The previous owner of your house, Frank, he was elderly and just gave in to keep the peace. But before him, she drove out a young family with her constant complaints and demands. Tyler, I probably shouldn't say this, but..." He leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile. "Good for you. It's about time someone stood up to her." As Mr. Patterson left, I felt something shift in the neighborhood dynamics. This wasn't just about a blocked driveway anymore. This was about boundaries, respect, and what happens when entitled behavior finally meets consequences. Victoria picked up her BMW at 6 p.m. that evening, according to Marco. She paid $485 in total fees and, according to the lot attendant, looked like she wanted to set the entire building on fire. But the car was released without incident, all paperwork signed, everything legal and documented. I thought that would be the end of it, a lesson learned, boundaries established, life moving forward. But I'd underestimated Victoria Ashford's capacity for escalation. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next morning started with a violation notice taped to my front door. Official city letterhead, a complaint filed about unauthorized business operations in a residential zone. I stared at it, coffee cup halfway to my lips, trying to understand. Business operations? I worked from home occasionally, but that was standard these days. Then I saw the details. Someone had reported me for running an illegal towing and impound operation from my residence. Victoria. It had to be. I called the City Code Enforcement Office. A bored-sounding clerk confirmed that yes, a complaint had been filed by a concerned neighbor, and an inspector would be coming out within 5 business days. I explained that I wasn't running any business from my home. I was a part owner of a company that operated elsewhere, but she just said the inspector would sort it out. Annoying, but manageable. I had nothing to hide. But then things got weird. That afternoon I found a flyer in my mailbox, not delivered by mail, but hand-placed. It was a photocopied notice with my address at the top. Warning to neighbors. The resident at 742 Oakmont Drive has been engaging in predatory towing practices and may target your vehicle next. Protect yourself and your guests. This individual has connections to towing companies and has shown aggressive, retaliatory behavior. Please be vigilant and report any suspicious activity. My hands shook reading it. This wasn't just petty, this was a character assassination. I walked outside and saw the same flyer in every mailbox on the street. She'd distributed them to the entire neighborhood. I was being painted as some kind of criminal, a threat to the community. My phone rang. It was Sarah Johnson, my neighbor with the homemade cookies. Tyler, I got this really strange flyer today, and I just wanted you to know that Jim and I don't believe a word of it. What happened with Victoria's car was completely justified. She's done this before. When she has a problem with someone, she launches these campaigns. The family before you? She spread rumors that they were running a drug operation. Completely false, but it made their lives miserable. What happened to them? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. They sold and moved within a year. Victoria won. Not this time, I thought. Not with me. I documented everything. Photographed the flyers, saved the code enforcement notice, kept a timeline. Then I did something Victoria probably didn't expect. I went to every neighbor personally. Door to door, I introduced myself properly, since most had only met me briefly, explained exactly what happened with the blocked driveway, and showed them the security footage on my phone. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. Turns out Victoria had made enemies all over Maplewood Heights. Then came the noise complaints. 3 nights in a row, police showed up at my door because someone had called in complaints about loud music or parties. Each time, the officers could clearly see I was alone, watching TV at reasonable volume, and they apologized for the inconvenience. The third officer, a veteran named Rodriguez, looked at me sympathetically and said, "Look, I can see what's happening here. Document every one of these calls. If it continues, you may have a harassment case." Victoria's campaign escalated. She filed a complaint with the HOA, which I'd barely known existed, claiming my father's Mustang was an abandoned vehicle and a neighborhood eyesore because it sat under a cover and wasn't driven daily. The HOA president, a reasonable man named Donald, called me to discuss it. When I explained the car's significance and showed him photos of its pristine condition, he dismissed the complaint immediately. "Victoria's been a thorn in this board's side for years," he admitted. "But she has money and time and uses both to make life difficult. Be careful, Tyler." I was being careful, but I was also getting angry. Every day brought a new petty attack. A complaint to the water company about my excessive usage. It wasn't. A report to animal control about a vicious dog. I didn't have any pets. Even a call to the fire department about suspicious smoke coming from my house. I'd been grilling hamburgers. Each complaint was investigated, each proven false, each adding to the documented pattern of harassment. I kept everything in a 3-ring binder that was getting uncomfortably thick. But documentation wasn't stopping her. If anything, the lack of response was making her bolder. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the initial towing incident. I was at work. I'd gone into the office for a big presentation when Sarah Johnson called me, her voice urgent. "Tyler, you need to get home, now. Victoria's here with some kind of contractor, and they're taking measurements of your driveway." I broke every speed limit getting home. When I arrived, I found Victoria standing in my driveway with a surveyor, both of them examining the property line. She looked up as I pulled in, her expression triumphant. "Tyler," she said with mock sweetness, "I've done some research. It turns out the property line between our homes may have been incorrectly marked. This driveway might actually extend 3 feet onto my property. If that's the case, you've been trespassing and I'll need you to remove the portion of your driveway that's on my land." The surveyor looked uncomfortable. I looked at Victoria and suddenly everything clicked into place. This wasn't about a driveway anymore. This wasn't about neighborhood courtesy. This was about control, about winning, about making sure that anyone who dared to challenge her paid the price. I pulled out my phone and called my real estate attorney, the one who'd handled my closing. "Nathan, I need you to send me the survey from my property purchase. Email it now, please." While we waited, Victoria continued her measurements, making a show of it for the gathering neighbors. Within 5 minutes, my phone pinged. I opened the official survey dated 6 months ago, completed by a certified surveyor, clearly showing the property line 2 feet from my driveway, entirely on my property. I showed it to her surveyor. He looked at it, looked at his own measurements, and nodded. "Ma'am, his survey is correct and recent. The property line is where it's marked." Victoria's face went through several shades of red. "That's impossible. I want a second opinion." I want... No, I said quietly. Every neighbor was watching now. The Johnsons, Mr. Patterson, the young couple, even families I didn't know. Everyone had come out to witness this confrontation. No more complaints, no more harassment, no more games, Victoria. This ends now. You can't tell me. I'm not telling you anything, I interrupted, my voice steady. I'm informing you. I've documented everything. Every false complaint, every noise report, every petty attack. I have security footage, witness statements, and a timeline spanning 3 weeks. And tomorrow morning I'm filing a harassment complaint and a restraining order. The neighborhood had gone silent. Victoria stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, unable to find words for perhaps the first time in her life. You blocked my driveway, I continued. I had your car legally towed. That should have been the end of it. But you chose to escalate. You chose to make this a war. So now we finish it. Legally, officially, and publicly. I turned to face the gathered neighbors. For anyone who's received those flyers or heard rumors, here's the truth. I held up my phone, showing the security footage of Victoria's BMW blocking my driveway at midnight. This is what really happened. Everything since then has been retaliation for enforcing basic property rights. Victoria's surveyor packed up his equipment and left. Victoria stood there isolated as neighbors who'd watched her reign of terror for years looked at her with expressions ranging from satisfaction to pity. She got into her BMW, now with a small scratch on the bumper that definitely wasn't there before the towing, and drove away without a word. But I knew Victoria Ashford well enough by now to know this wasn't surrender. This was retreat. And if I didn't end this definitively, she'd regroup and come back harder. The next morning I would go on offense. And this time, I wasn't just defending my driveway. I was defending my peace, my home, and my right to exist in my own neighborhood without constant psychological warfare. The question was, how far would Victoria go before she finally accepted defeat? And more importantly, how far was I willing to go to ensure she did? The next morning, I sat in my attorney Nathan's office with 3 people I'd never imagined needing: a real estate lawyer, a civil litigation specialist, and a private investigator. The binder of documentation I'd compiled sat on Nathan's desk, 3 inches thick with evidence. This is actually impressive, Nathan said, flipping through complaint forms, police reports, security footage screenshots, and neighbor statements. Normally in harassment cases, we struggle to establish a pattern. You've done the work for us. But Tyler, I need to ask, are you sure you want to pursue this? Legal action is expensive, time-consuming, and it'll make the neighborhood situation worse before it gets better. I thought about my father's Mustang in my driveway, the car we'd restored together. I thought about coming home every day wondering what new complaint or attack Victoria would launch. I thought about Sarah Johnson's words. The family before you, Victoria won. I'm sure, I said. But I don't just want to defend myself. I want to understand what I'm really dealing with. That's why I hired him. I gestured to Marcus Chen, the private investigator, a former detective who specialized in civil cases. Marcus opened his laptop. I've spent the past 72 hours digging into Victoria Ashford's history. And Tyler, your instinct was right. This isn't her first rodeo. He pulled up a series of documents. Victoria has been involved in 5 separate civil disputes in the past 12 years. 2 restraining orders filed against her, both dismissed because the plaintiffs moved away before trial. 3 property line disputes, including one where she tried to claim an entire shared driveway. And here's the interesting part. Every single person who's gone up against her has either moved or settled quietly. Why? I asked. Because Victoria doesn't just have money, she has time and patience. She turns these things into wars of attrition. She'll file complaint after complaint, drag people into mediation, make living in the neighborhood so miserable that it becomes easier to just leave. She wins by making resistance too expensive and emotionally draining to maintain. Nathan leaned back in his chair. But she's made mistakes with you. She's escalated too quickly, been too blatant. And you've documented everything. Here's what I recommend. We file a harassment complaint and request a restraining order. We also send a cease and desist letter outlining every incident and making it clear that continued harassment will result in a civil lawsuit for damages, emotional distress, and legal fees. Will that stop her? I asked. It'll stop most people, the litigation specialist Jennifer Park interjected. But based on her history, she'll probably ignore it, and that's when we have her. Every violation after that cease and desist becomes additional evidence. She'll either back down or hang herself legally. We filed the paperwork that afternoon. The restraining order hearing was set for 2 weeks out. The cease and desist letter was sent via certified mail, signature required, ensuring Victoria couldn't claim she'd never received it. Then I did something unexpected. I called a neighborhood meeting. Mr. Patterson helped me organize it at his house, neutral ground. 15 neighbors showed up, including several I'd never met who lived on the outskirts of Victoria's radius of terror. I presented everything: the timeline, the evidence, the pattern of harassment, not just against me but historically against others. Several neighbors shared their own stories of Victoria's behavior, noise complaints filed against birthday parties, threats over tree branches that barely crossed property lines, constant HOA complaints about minor aesthetic issues. "Here's what I'm proposing," I said. "I'm pursuing this legally on my own behalf, but if anyone else has documentation of similar harassment from Victoria, past or present, I'd like to compile it. Not to pile on, but to establish a comprehensive pattern. This isn't about revenge. It's about setting boundaries and ensuring this doesn't happen to the next person who..." Because Victoria doesn't just have money, she has time and patience. She turns these things into wars of attrition. She'll file complaint after complaint, drag people into mediation, make living in the neighborhood so miserable that it becomes easier to just leave. She wins by making resistance too expensive and emotionally draining to maintain. Nathan leaned back in his chair. "But she's made mistakes with you. She's escalated too quickly, been too blatant. And you've documented everything. Here's what I recommend. We file a harassment complaint and request a restraining order. We also send a cease and desist letter outlining every incident and making it clear that continued harassment will result in a civil lawsuit for damages, emotional distress, and legal fees." "Will that stop her?" I asked. "It'll stop most people," the litigation specialist Jennifer Park interjected. "But based on her history, she'll probably ignore it. And that's when we have her. Every violation after that cease and desist becomes additional evidence. She'll either back down or hang herself legally." We filed the paperwork that afternoon. The restraining order hearing was set for 2 weeks out. The cease and desist letter was sent via certified mail, signature required, ensuring Victoria couldn't claim she'd never received it. Then I did something unexpected. I called a neighborhood meeting. Mr. Patterson helped me organize it at his house, neutral ground. 15 neighbors showed up, including several I'd never met who lived on the outskirts of Victoria's radius of terror. I presented everything: the timeline, the evidence, the pattern of harassment, not just against me but historically against others. Several neighbors shared their own stories of Victoria's behavior: noise complaints filed against birthday parties, threats over tree branches that barely crossed property lines, constant HOA complaints about minor aesthetic issues. "Here's what I'm proposing," I said. "I'm pursuing this legally on my own behalf. But if anyone else has documentation of similar harassment from Victoria, past or present, I'd like to compile it. Not to pile on, but to establish a comprehensive pattern. This isn't about revenge, it's about setting boundaries and ensuring this doesn't happen to the next person who moves here." 7 neighbors contributed their own documentation. The binder got thicker. The restraining order hearing arrived. I showed up with Nathan. Victoria arrived with an attorney who looked expensive and annoyed. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Gonzalez, reviewed the evidence for 20 minutes. Security footage, complaint forms, witness statements, the cease and desist violation records. Victoria had filed 2 more false complaints after receiving it, and the compiled history of similar patterns with other neighbors. Victoria's attorney tried to dismiss it as neighborhood disagreements and paint me as overly sensitive. But when Judge Gonzalez asked Victoria directly, "Mrs. Ashford, did you block this man's driveway at 11:47 p.m. as shown in the security footage?" and Victoria hesitated before answering, the judge's expression said everything. The temporary restraining order was granted immediately. Victoria was ordered to maintain a distance of 100 feet from my property unless absolutely necessary, cease all contact, and refrain from filing any complaints to any agency regarding my property without documented evidence. Violations would result in contempt charges. As we left the courthouse, Victoria's attorney pulled Nathan aside. "My client would like to discuss a settlement." Nathan looked at me. I thought about what settlement meant. Probably money, an agreement to drop everything, both sides walking away, Victoria's usual playbook. But this time, she'd be the one paying to make it go away. "Tell your client," I said directly to Victoria's attorney, "that I don't want her money. I want peace. The restraining order stands. If she leaves me alone, this ends. If she doesn't, I'll pursue a civil suit for every documented incident. It's her choice." We walked away. Nathan was grinning. "That," he said, "was the exact right thing to say." The following weeks were eerily quiet. No complaints, no mysterious incidents, no flyers. Victoria's BMW stayed away from my driveway. I'd see her occasionally, leaving for work or returning home, and she'd look straight ahead as if I didn't exist, which was perfect. The neighborhood changed too. Mr. Patterson told me that several other residents had been emboldened to push back on Victoria's HOA complaints, and the HOA board had actually started dismissing her submissions as frivolous. The balance of power had shifted. 2 months after the restraining order, I was washing my dad's Mustang in the driveway, something I did monthly, when a car pulled up. A young couple, maybe 30 years old, stepped out and looked at the house next door, the one that had just gone up for sale. They walked over, admiring the Mustang.